Here are the 10 biggest takeaways coming out of week 13 heading into week 14 that you need to know. Number one has to be handcuff your running backs. We are in handcuff season now. Bench depth is much less important this time of the year than your starting lineup, and it is so crucial, as we saw last night, that you handcuff your running backs. If you had Jordan Mason all year and then got Christian McCaffrey back and was just like, well, I don't need Jordan Mason anymore and dropped him, you're certainly regretting that decision. And if you go into the fantasy playoffs without the clear handcuff to your stud running back and he gets hurt, you're also going to regret that decision. Now, of course, this doesn't mean you have to get every handcuff that is out there, but if you have a stud running back with a clear handcuff, you need to go pick up that handcuff if they're still available. Talking about guys like Tyler Algier if you have Bijan Robinson, Blake Corum if you have Kyron Williams, Ray Davis if you have James Cook, and many others as well. And if you're not sure who the handcuff is to your running back, don't worry, we did that already. We broke down a video with the top 10 handcuffs that you need to stash for the fantasy playoffs. I'll put a link to that in the description down below so you can go watch it after this video. The next biggest takeaway from week 13 is that Bucky Irving has absolutely taken over this Bucs backfield, and he is honestly primed to be a league-winning running back this year. He had 25 carries while Rachaad White only had 11, and he had 3 targets when Rachaad White only had 1. And that is a really big thing here for Bucky Irving. He's not only taken over the lead down role, he's taken over the pass catching role. This guy could be an absolute monster the rest of the season. He's actually been one of the best real life running backs, breaking tackles, picking up yards after contact. You look at the Bucs schedule the rest of the season, they get Raiders, Chargers, Cowboys, and the Panthers to finish the season. Outside of that Chargers matchup, these are all smash spots for Bucky Irving. This guy can continue to be a monster the rest of the way. If you got Bucky Irving, start him every single week. And I hope you're finally ready to buy into the Bears passing game. Over the last 3 games, Caleb Williams is 4th in passing yards and he's 3rd in fantasy points among QBs. And over that same span, DJ Moore is currently your wide receiver 1 in PPR scoring, and Keenan Allen is the wide receiver 4. Now, unfortunately, rookie Rome Odunze has kind of been left out of all of this, but if you got any of those first 3 guys I talked about, you got to be feeling good. I mentioned a couple weeks ago after they fired Shane Waldron, I said, hey, I'm buying back into this Bears passing attack. A lot of people called me a clown and said, oh, you're ridiculous. Have you seen Caleb Williams, how bad he is? Well, hopefully now you realize why I said that, and hopefully now you accept that, hey, we do have to buy into this Bears passing game. If you're still not willing to, then you're just honestly not paying attention. This could be one of the most fantasy-friendly passing games the rest of the way. I'm not ready to call any of these guys must-starts yet, but I certainly think they are guys you can start, even in 1 QB leagues with Caleb Williams. Hey, real quick before I get to the rest of the takeaways, if you're enjoying this video or any of the videos we do, just ask really quick, you hit subscribe, hit that like button, we'd greatly appreciate it. The next biggest takeaway for me is that Jayden Daniels is back to being a must-start QB. After that kind of rough stretch there, after the rib injuries, and he had a couple of tough matchups, it was like, okay, maybe he's hitting the rookie wall. Maybe this guy isn't going to be a must-start QB. But over the last 2 games, he is the QB1 in fantasy. And a big part of that is the fact that he has 16 carries, 108 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. 8 of those 16 carries were designed runs. This is what we want to see from Jayden Daniels. Now, of course, they're on bye this week, so you can't start him. But in the fantasy playoffs, this guy has to be a locked-in, no doubt QB1 rest of the way. And the Commanders do not have a tough schedule. They get Saints, Eagles, Falcons to finish the year. He should be fine in all of those games. Jayden Daniels, a must-start QB in the fantasy playoffs. The next biggest takeaway for me is that Russell Wilson and George Pickens are cooking, and they're probably going to continue to cook. In the games Russell Wilson has started this year, he is the QB 10 in fantasy. If you take out that snow game against Cleveland a couple weeks ago, he's a QB 6 in fantasy. George Pickens over that stretch, the wide receiver 3 in PPR scoring. The Steelers also lead the league in attempts and completions over 20 yards since Russell Wilson has become the starter. This has unlocked not only this passing game for Russell Wilson, of course, but has unlocked George Pickens as more than just a boom-bust guy. Now he's a guy who just pretty much booms every single week. You have to start George Pickens the rest of the way. This guy is as close to a must-start as it can get. And I think Russell Wilson, if you're looking for a QB, is also a great start the rest of the season. Again, not a very tough schedule here. Other than the Eagles in Week 15, no matchup should scare you for Russell Wilson or George Pickens the rest of the way. And then my next biggest takeaway is it looks like Tank Dell just isn't going to happen this year in fantasy football. Going to go down as a bust, no doubt, in a season with a lot of big busts, let's be honest. And a lot of people like to say, Tank Dell isn't very good, he's trash, whatever. And yeah, look, Tank Dell isn't like completely blameless here. but it's really because of CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud has been awful this year, and another week here where he had over 100 air yards and only 23 receiving yards. CJ Stroud had him wide open for a 70-yard touchdown, threw the ball late, ended up being underthrown, and it's not the first time we've seen this year. For whatever reason, CJ Stroud has regressed big time, and it is affecting Tank Dell. Again, I'm not saying Tank Dell is blameless here, but putting all the blame on Tank Dell is a little ridiculous. But regardless of that, for fantasy, it doesn't really matter. It just looks like at this point, Tank Dell isn't going to happen in 2024. Move on from Tank Dell. But I'll tell you what will happen. That is Jordan Love getting at least 1 yard in fantasy. I think he can do that on Thursday night facing that Lions defense. And if he does, you win that pick on Underdog if you're a new customer. Just make sure you join using promo code ENDGAME, because not only will that get you that Jordan Love new customer special, but also up to $1,000 in bonus cash. My next takeaway is the Raiders might actually have a league winner on their team. That's Brock Bowers, and I can't even say might. He is going to absolutely be a league winner. You got to have Brock Bowers in your lineup every single week, no questions asked. But you also might need to have Jakobi Meyers in your lineup every single week, no questions asked. In the games he's played without Davante Adams this year, he is the wide receiver 10 in PPR scoring, and he is 12th among all wide receivers in first read percentage. And it doesn't seem to matter if it's Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. Both of these guys more than fine. Brock Bowers might actually break Puka's rookie reception record that he just set last year. And Jakobi Meyers looks like a no doubt has to be locked in your lineup fantasy wide receiver. Never thought we'd say this about the Raiders in 2024, but they have two players that have to be in fantasy lineups the rest of the way. And my next biggest takeaway from week 13 is Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison might be about ready to explode in fantasy. And I know this is probably going to sound crazy when you hear this because Kyler Murray's been so inconsistent this year, as has Marvin Harrison. According to Mike Clay of ESPN, the Cardinals offense has had the toughest schedule against defenses in terms of touchdowns allowed, points allowed, EPA allowed. And not only that, the Cardinals have had the toughest QB schedule for fantasy football. And despite that, Kyler Murray has had some very nice games this year, as has Marvin Harrison. Now they get one of the easiest schedules to finish the season, and they've both been playing well. It wouldn't shock me at all if suddenly Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison go on a run to finish the season and carry teams to fantasy championships. I know these guys have both been frustrating this year, but I'm urging you, don't give up on them just yet. They're set to explode down the stretch. And it only took 13 games, but we finally saw Rico Dowdle take over this Dallas backfield completely. Ezekiel Elliott only 1 carry on Thanksgiving Day. I don't know why it took Dallas this long, giving Zeke carries, Dalvin Cook carries, all these dusty guys. Like, what are we doing here, Dallas? But Rico Dowdle finally absolutely took over this backfield. He was 6th among all running backs in expected fantasy points in week 13. And he gets an extremely fantasy-friendly schedule to finish. He gets the Bengals this week, the Panthers next week, then the Bucks in week 16. Unfortunately, he does get the Eagles in week 17. That might be a tough spot for him. But if this is your fantasy championship at that point, you get to that point, you're probably just going to keep rolling with Rico Dowdle anyways. Rico Dowdle set up to absolutely smash rest of the season here. And finally, it looks like Dallas has let him take over the backfield, which should have been the case all season long. And then my final takeaway from week 13 is it looks like Ladd McConkey is going to end the year as the best rookie wide receiver in fantasy and in real life. Despite all the hype, Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors got before the draft, Ladd McConkey has actually been the best wide receiver. He's only 3 PPR points behind Malik Neighbors in terms of most fantasy points among rookie wide receivers. But when you look at other metrics that kind of matter more for how good you are as a player, he is 11th in yards per route run among all wide receivers under the age of 23 in the last 10 seasons. And this is a guy who's been getting better and better as the season goes on. It wouldn't surprise me if he is head and shoulders the best rookie wide receiver this year. Now, there is a little worry going into week 14. He banged up at his knee. He always seems to be a little banged up. But if he's healthy and good to go the rest of the season, I think Ladd McConkey is going to end up being this year's best rookie wide receiver. All right, hopefully those takeaways help shed some light on some things that could happen the rest of the way. But if you need help winning this week to get into your fantasy playoffs, we got you. Everything you need, it's in our Week 14 playlist, which you can find right here.